sure they could squeeze one more photographer on board.
The great catch-all that they could use to restrict anything that you said was this phrase, damaging to morale. Now, you could argue that more or less anything could be damaging to morale. There was, for example, when we were sailing down to the Falklands, there was an incident on the Canberra when, after an evening's drinking, a few paras climbed into one of the lifts. Too many of them got into the lift on the Canberra, pressed the button and the lift broke and it fell 3 or 4 stories through the ship. A couple of the paras were quite seriously injured. We were not allowed to report that because it was felt it would be damaging to morale if it was seen that British troops were getting drunk and were having accidents on a ship. This was before we'd even got to the Falklands.
The Ministry of Defence lost credibility, particularly with foreign correspondents. And there are several examples of major news organisations in the States saying that they put no basis at all on what the British press was saying about the war because they regarded it as a propaganda job. So I think internationally one saw a turnaround of support from being very pro-British to being far more neutral. And certainly Argentine sources came to exercise much more influence than they had done at the beginning.
Offensive land operations are at this moment in progress in the Falkland Islands. You will understand that I cannot at this stage go further.
Well, in the Falklands, Mr. MacDonald, giving a press conference, knew that anything he said with the absolute confidence that no one in the room knew more than he knew, or knew the truth if he was telling a fudge. In Vietnam, the poor old briefer knew that everyone in the room knew more than he knew. So that, because at least those of us who'd been out of Saigon at all, and I would be less than honest if I didn't confess that we used to love to go and tweak the briefers, whether they're the military or the civilian briefers, because if you came back to the story and you were an eyewitness or you spoke to an officer in the field, got the story, filed it, went to the briefing, the so-called 5 o'clock follies, and at that point the only purpose in going was to find out, now that you know what happened, to find out what the government says happened.
The absence of foreign journalists helped to narrow our perspective on what was going on. Probably reporters from any country are peculiarly involved in a war which is affecting their own country or their own countrymen. But obviously the presence of foreign journalists would help to give you a wider view of it. I think it would have made things a lot more difficult. I don't think that any of the American reporters I've ever come across would have put up with half of the nonsense that we put up with. They simply wouldn't have tolerated it.
Usually one guarantee of keeping a balance of reporting in a war is having reports